It's now my pleasure to begin the next part of the session. So our closing now with some very special guests. I just want to give you a quick lay of the land and explain how this is going to work. Chancellor Rosa has agreed to join us this morning. We're so grateful for that. I'll introduce all three of our guests, including Acting Commissioner Beth Berlin and Regent Odekirk, and go through a quick bio for all three of them so that we have that out of the way and properly introduce them. Chancellor Rosa will then speak to us for about 20 minutes. Then we'll have a seat, and the four of us will have a discussion based on the questions, curiosities, ideas that you submitted and that House of Delegates members worked through yesterday. Given the amount of time, we probably won't get to everything, but the questions are awfully important. I'm very grateful to Chancellor Rosa for agreeing to answer those questions and additional follow-up in the next councilgram. So we'll have them in written form if we don't get to all of the questions. So lest you get frustrated that they're not being answered, we'll make sure that we do get feedback out to you. There's some really important topics for us to address. So let me begin by introducing Chancellor Rosa. Dr. Rosa was first elected as the regent for the 12th Judicial District in 2008. In March 2016, Dr. Rosa was elected by her colleagues as Chancellor. Born in New York City, but raised for the first 10 years of her life in Puerto Rico, Dr. Rosa attended public elementary and junior high schools in the Bronx, Districts 9 and 10, before graduating from St. Helena's High School, now Monsignor Scanlon High School, in the Throgs Neck section of Brooklyn. She received a BA in psychology from the City College of New York and holds 2 Masters of Science in Education degrees, one in Administration and Supervision, the other in Bilingual Education from the City College of New York and Lehman College, respectively. She also received an ED and an EDD in Administration, Planning, and Social Policy from Harvard University. Dr. Rosa worked in the New York City Department of Education as a bilingual paraprofessional, teacher, and reading coordinator, served as an assistant principal and principal in special education, introduced an integrated linguistic model in developing a multilingual and multicultural school for general and special education populations, was a principal of IS 218, a full-service community school in partnership with the Children's Aid Society in District 6, and developed and implemented the Office of Conflict Resolution for the New York City Division of Special Education. She's taught a wide variety of graduate courses as well, was appointed by Chancellor Rudy Crew to the position of Superintendent of Community Schools in District 8. District 8 consisted of approximately 25,000 students and 30 schools encompassing neighborhoods of the South Bronx, including Soundview and Hunts Point and the northeast section of the Bronx known as Throgs Neck. Many of her schools achieved great success, including one she founded as superintendent, Middle School 101, Maritime Academy for Science and Technology, becoming a top-ranked middle school in the city of New York. She's been elected to the Alumni Council of Harvard University as well, received a wide variety of awards, and represents many through boards and other volunteer activities. We welcome Chancellor Rosa. We also have joining us today Regent Beverly Odekirk. She was appointed to the New York State Board of Regents in 2015 and proudly represents students, educators, parents, and community members within the 11 counties comprising the major geographic portion of the North Country. Regent Odekirk brings her appointment over 50 years of service in public education, and many of you are very familiar with Regent Odekirk, having sat in this room as a superintendent. She began her career as a kindergarten teacher, taught for 17 years in various positions throughout Jordan, Elbridge, and Weedsport Central School Districts, as well as for Onondaga, Cayuga, Boise. Served as an elementary principal, director of elementary education, and again, a wide variety of positions, including being the deputy superintendent at Governor Central School District, superintendent of schools in Morristown, Tioga Central School District, and Valley before becoming a BOCES district superintendent. Following her retirement, her first retirement, she points out, Regent Odekirk served 4 additional districts as interim superintendent over a 10-year period, culminating in being the shared superintendent for St. Regis Falls and Brushton-Moroa Central School District, a first in the state of New York. Beth Berlin, our acting commissioner, assumed the role of interim commissioner of the State Education Department on September 1st, 2019. She had also served as acting commissioner between January and July 2015 upon the departure of previous Commissioner of Education, John King. Ms. Berlin was appointed in January 2013 to serve as the Executive Deputy Commissioner of the State of New York. In that role, Ms. Berlin manages the day-to-day operations and administration of the State Education Department. Formerly, she served as Executive Deputy Commissioner of the New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. At that agency, she led the group responsible for overseeing a range of the state's most important programs for its low-income residents and providing leadership, guidance, and support to local departments of social services in the administration of these programs. This included helping public assistance recipients and potential recipients enter the workforce, promoting access to economic supports for low-income working New Yorkers, connecting individuals with special needs to appropriate services, and helping to improve child well-being. Interim Commissioner Berlin has an extensive background in the delivery of social and human service programs and has been an outstanding partner of the Council throughout her time in her previous position and as an acting commissioner. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. And if Chancellor Rosa, you could come for your remarks, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Traditionally, if I was in the Bronx, I would also say buenos dias. Buenos dias. I'd like to begin my presentation by, first of all, really thanking the Council for this opportunity. I know that formerly we had Commissioner Ilya, who I know from Bev and from her, she looked forward to and enjoyed every year being with you and being with you in so many different ways. So thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity in light of our current circumstances. I want to give a real shout out to Bev Oderkirk. I call Bev my sister from the other B, not from the Bronx, but from North Country. And she's been on this board. She has been somebody that I have been able to share many of my painful moments and many of a lot of my joys as well in serving the state. The other person I want to thank is Beth Berlin, who has always said, as we say in Spanish, presente. She has always been someone that has been not only willing, but has done this kind of work with dignity, charm, and elegance. So I want to thank her in front of all of you for taking this position for a second time and doing it with such grace and doing it with so much love and commitment. I mean, there are times that I call her on a Sunday and she is in the office. So Beth, thank you so much for doing this a second time around. I know in spirit the rest of our board is here today, so I do want to acknowledge the commitment of many of our members who could not be here, but are with us in terms of their work. So today I want to invite you to join the Board of Regents and our department, SED, on our current journey, using the New York State motto of Excelsior, ever upward, still higher, as Lorna Lewis said, still higher. And also the African proverb, I am because we are. I'm going to say it again. I am because we are. The promise of public education is driven by the issue of equity as a driving force. I want to share with you the mission of New York State Board of Regents, which is to ensure that every child, just like your conference, has equitable access to the highest Excelsior, quality educational opportunities, services, and support in schools that provide effective instruction aligned to the state standards, as well as positive learning opportunities, as we know them as opportunities that are culturally responsive. Creating culturally responsive environments so that each child is prepared to succeed, both in college, career, and in their own way in terms of civic learning as citizens. The essence of our work is to promote educational equity and excellence for all students. I know that that's been the theme of many of your conferences, but particularly this conference. Let us remember that in the landscape of education, we have too many weapons of distraction, too many weapons of mass distraction. And so it is very easy to get caught up in some of those distractions. It is important for us in our collective mission, both in terms of our personal communities and our state mission, to create an ecosystem of excellence that includes equity, diversity, inclusion, opportunities, access, pathways, innovation, with respect, trust, caring, and building relationships. One of our guiding questions for our board always keeps us grounded in, does the American dream belong to all students? And what are our guiding principles of a quality education for all students? As a board, our commitment to success of every student means that we acknowledge the uneven playing field that currently exists in many of our communities. We have to have courageous conversations about these issues and the impact that these issues have on many of our disadvantaged students, particularly disadvantaged by economic disparities. It is important for all of us in this room and all of us in this state to create a roadmap that helps our students with the next generation of learning standards only as a destination. We must have multiple pathways of measurement or assessments. We must create environments that reduce the predictability of who succeeds and who fails. We must interrupt the practices that negatively impact struggling students. It is important for the people in this room. Lorna, you call the people in this room to action in terms of diversity. I'm going to submit that that is a key point, but we also must commit to ensure that students with disabilities and English language learners are an integral part of our design for success. We must ensure technical support for the learning needs of all students. We must improve outcomes for all students, but particularly students of color. Together, we must be driven by a sense of commitment, but also a sense of making sure that we trust each other, that we honor each other, that we are transparent and we support, but particularly that we are committed to all the children of the state. We often talk about one family with various relatives. That is the way that I feel sometimes when we are at our Board of Regents meeting. We have upstate, downstate, and that sometimes, it's interesting, we very rarely, I said this to Beverly last night at 11:30 last night, we very rarely talk about upstate, downstate. And I think that that's because we have found in many of our discussions common unity, a sense of community. We have individuals sitting at that table, and I didn't realize that one of my sisters at that table brings her feistiness, while it may be from North Country and rural, she brings the same feistiness and commitment that I bring to the table for my children of New York City and the Bronx. We must look at rural, urban, suburban, and other places that educate all children. Our differences are our strengths. They bring a uniqueness to the conversation. We must celebrate both common unity and our uniqueness. One example that I will give you is on our Board of Regents, for example, state aid. We have someone from North Country and someone from Manhattan. Professions. We have somebody who's at large from New York City and someone from Rochester. Higher ed. We have someone from Buffalo and we have someone who represents Brooklyn. And on and on and on. And these are the individuals that constantly bring to the table their personal experiences, but more importantly, what does this have to do with children? So I will say again, the two Bs, Betty from the Bronx and Beverly from North Country, many times have conversations about our similarities, but sometimes our differences. And sometimes our competing interests. And how do we get to yes, as Yuri Fisher says? How do we get to a place that allows us both to have a winning conversation? We find ourselves looking at these individual solutions, and we must find multiple solutions to these uniqueness. At the same time, we must establish our common bond, not an easy task. So the other part of this conversation that I want to have with you is not only calling you to join our team in terms of this work that needs to be done, but also I know that Chuck asked me to talk about priorities. So today I'm just going to spend a few minutes on some of the issues that we are grappling with. And when I say grappling, we're grappling with them. High school graduation pathways is one that has been dear to me as somebody who was a former high school person that dealt with young people who were returning from incarceration. I was a high school principal on 127th Street, and my students were returning from Rikers Island. And yet some of the most brilliant minds that I have ever met. But somehow, on the highway of life, they got off the wrong exit. And so it was my duty, my job, to help them reinvent, reshape, refine, and make sure that somehow they would begin to make better choices. High school graduation pathways is very, very important to all of us sitting in this room, and the board has made that its top priority. Our other issue is creating multiple pathways on the superhighway to get our students to their designed destinations. Developing the assessment tools that measure not what our students we think they know, but what our students can demonstrate. And it cannot be a moment or somebody from my era, a Kodak moment. It must be an approach to recognizing proficiency by using multiple measures. We must focus on mental health, emotional aspects of many of our kids who come to us from trauma issues and communities and family backgrounds that really are challenged. We must make sure that we understand the approach of teaching the whole child. We must recognize that diversity is an asset and helps us to advance opportunities to create conditions to demonstrate, all of us in this room, our commitment to it. We must help support our school districts as a state to prepare the next generation of thinkers and leaders. But we must start this work early in investing in early learning opportunities. Again, one of our biggest priorities. Another priority is, given the climate in this country at this time, safety and keeping our schools safe and keeping our children safe. Connecting higher education teacher leadership development theory to research and practice is extremely important. We must take stock of the shortage of people that are entering this field, and we must begin to look at the pipeline and make sure that we, as stewards of this work, draw on those strengths of those people those young people that are thinking about this profession. We must examine the entire teacher shortage and begin to address it. These are just a few of the things that are our priority, and we hope that they are your priorities. I think in the next couple of months, you need to know that we are committed not only to continuing the work that I know that the former Commissioner Ilya started, which was not only the listening to us, but making sure that we're hearing you, and making sure that not only are we hearing you, but that your voices become translated into practices and policies. New York State has many schools that provide world-class education, but we must recognize that there is so much more that needs to be done in order to ensure that every child has the opportunity to attend a highly effective school. In closing, I will use Ben Franklin's quote, which says, "Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are." Thank you for this opportunity. I want you to know we practiced this. And we didn't get it right.
So it is a different format for us, so thanks for bearing with it, and thank you very much for your comments, Chancellor Rosa. I think on behalf of the room, we appreciate that partnership and that idea of us all working together and your priorities being our priorities as the state of New York, and the notion of always higher and always doing more and continuously improving, so thank you for that. We'd like to start out, and I think this is a casual format, so whomever wants to jump in, there's some specific questions, I think, more for each of you, but really we're curious from the Board of Regents. If you could help us understand the search process for a new commissioner, what the nuts and bolts look like, what the timing might look like, and beyond that, the bigger picture, what are you looking for in the next commissioner for the state of New York?
Okay. Am on?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. You know, it's funny, I do have to say, since I'm on and talking to my lapel, when I went to the bathroom before, I kept thinking, is this on? And so I was like tapping it.
It was, by the way, just so you know.
And so I just said to myself, okay, when I flush, I just hope the entire audience doesn't, you know. But anyway, thank you again for this opportunity. So let me start by saying that we are going to be taking our time. We are very blessed, as I said earlier, that we have Beth Berlin in the interim acting position as commissioner for the second time. Somebody that really has I would say the understanding of the department, but also she was the liaison, it still continues to be, to the board, so that the transition of the work with the board is easier, obviously. So we are going to embark on a national search, so we want to say that. I'm only going to speak and again, I know this gets misquoted, but my preference would be to have somebody who really, truly understands New York State. And it doesn't mean that we're going to exclude individuals that have a track record, an amazing track record in other places. But I do feel that given all the different initiatives we're engaged in currently, that it would be helpful to have somebody that understands the state in terms of its complexities and the state in terms of its need from, as I said, from rural, urban, suburban, and all the different issues that we are confronting at this time. So that would be a preference. To put a timeline, I think we've talked about it, and there is a process that I'm going to ask Beth to kind of outline, because it's a process that we're going to go through. Again, my preference would be to get through this year with as little interruption, and to have somebody come in towards the end of the year and begin a transition, and then take over, hopefully, at the conclusion of this year. So I really want to slow things down a bit and make sure that we find this amazing individual that's out there. Now, to your question about what are we looking for, I do know that this board has had some discussion, limited discussion, because as you know, this is still raw for us. I mean, it happened in July. Most of us were gone in August. I know that Beth would tell you it certainly shortened my August vacation. So we've been working through August to put some systems in place, do some hiring, advertising, backfilling positions that we have. And one of the things that's been amazing is that all of you, not just this organization, but many of you, have sent in statements about what you believe the next superintendent, their not just their qualities, but your interest in making sure that the preparation and the principles of the individual are reflected in the work that you are doing and the work that the department is doing. So we are going to welcome the feedback and the submission of those things that are very important to not just this organization, but several of our family members, our stakeholders in this process. So, but we are going to take our time, and we are going to be very mindful and thoughtful about the person who takes us from the work that Commissioner Ilya has done and builds on that to the next generation of work.
I'm a little bit biased, but incredibly proud of the people in this room and think they're profoundly talented. And they balance this idea of being visionaries and inspiring their communities, their kids, their teachers to get to a higher place while managing the day-to-day really well. And it's a complex, large department, and it requires, in our estimation, a great manager, but also a person who can think broadly and inspire all of us, inspire our kids and our communities. How do you view that role of the commissioner to provide vision, and how can the Board of Regents support that? What is the Board of Regents role versus the Chancellor, versus the Commissioner's role, and that kind of that whole picture?
Before I get to that, I'm going to ask Beth.
Sure.
The teacher in me is keeping you focused.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit about the process.
About the process, because you did ask
Sure.
about the process,
Sure.
yes.
Similar to what was done last time, we will be looking to secure a search firm who can help manage and navigate the process. And the reason why that's important is, as you've heard Chancellor and certainly other regions talk about, is they're envisioning an opportunity to hear from you and other members of the field, what is needed in New York at this time. Where are we? What are the experiences, the skills? And it will allow that opportunity to make sure that we're thinking about what is present in New York, as well as what are the priorities over the next 3 to 5 years. That process then includes organizing and managing the interview process, which would be led by a team of regents, the search committee. And then we would go through what is probably more of a traditional process from your perspective of interviewing, recruitment, as well as in a process that would end up before the Board of Regents.
Thanks. Sure, I'll ask that question again, and I want to reframe it just a little bit too. Okay. When announcing the shift in the department, the statement was made that the Board of Regents would take a more active role in managing the day-to-day. So again, as a group of people who also work with boards and think about that interesting role and responsibility piece for boards relative to the superintendent, commissioner relative to the Board of Regents, how do you see that role? How do you see the role of the Board of Regents versus the commissioner's role? And again, if there's somebody we're looking for vision and that bigger picture, how does the Board of Regents support the chancellor, or the commissioner, I'm sorry, I keep saying that, in developing that vision long term?
Okay, so let me answer part A. The reason, and I'm the one who made the statement on behalf of the board that we will take a much more active role. Part of that, because we've, in the last several months, we've lost quite a few positions. Part of what we wanted to do was stabilize, get some, advertise, have Beth spend more time inside the shell at home, and focus on those things that we needed to get done in terms of filling those positions. So in doing that, we decided that we would share the expectations that usually come with any commissioner in terms of visibility, in terms of the optics, right? So in doing that, we met, including Vice Chancellor and other regents, and we said that we would look at the former commissioner's calendar, schedule, and that we would look at those things that we wanted to continue to support, and we came up with a way to continue to manage that, but at the same time keeping the issue of making sure that the stability, internal stability, would be in place. So that was a decision for this period of time, to make sure that those positions that we need to fill are in place in order for SED to continue to function. So that was that decision. At no point was it a decision, like most of you know, in terms of your board, to have your board do any of the day-to-day. That is not. Sure.
We're not doing the day. The board's not doing the day.
Well, I'm talking about the fact. By the way, the interesting thing is that we have our Monday calls. We go through and then Beth goes through the week in terms of doing what she needs to do to be responsive to the field, to be responsive to the board, to be responsive to the issues that obviously we're confronting. At the same time, I think what's interesting right now is that we get an opportunity to, at the end of the week, to reflect on, okay, what else needs to be done. So our hope is that that we continue to do that until such time as we are able to select a new commissioner, and then Beth has been gracious enough to then will be gracious enough to transition with the new person selected.
Great, thank you. You mentioned some of the positions and internal capacity. Maybe, Beth, if you could talk to us a little bit about filling positions right now and the capacity in the department. And also, for all three of you, maybe the long-term picture around capacity within the department and how to maintain really good people. What are the types of things that you might be thinking about in terms of solidifying? There have been wonderful people, and there still are excellent people in the department that work so closely with us. What's your perspective, one, on right now? What are you doing to fill those positions? What's the timeline, and what do the nuts and bolts look like? But also, long-term, how do you maintain that within the department?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about that, and want to just acknowledge my appreciation to Chancellor Rosa for her support. As she said, this has been a priority of hers, of mine, that we look at the leadership positions that are available in the agency, and candidly, we have several. We've got our general counsel position, Deputy Commissioner for Higher Education, our Assistant Commissioner for Accountability, our Assistant Commissioner for World Languages and Bilingual Education, and the Assistant Commissioner that was overseeing the Early Childhood Program, among others. So we've really undertaken, with Chancellor's support and encouragement, an active outreach effort to be bringing and recruiting individuals that have the experience that's needed. And one of the things very consistent with what the Chancellor said is, we understand how important the work that you do is. And so looking for individuals that have experience and understand what it's like to have a vision and a policy goal, but that it has to be implemented and supported by the department, but really implemented by the field. That's going to be critical for us in thinking through and establishing a team that's really going to allow us to be successful. I think, as with a lot of government entities, succession planning is a challenge. It doesn't come naturally within the civil service structure. I will say that when we lose individuals because they're recruited, we had one individual recruited to be the Commissioner of Education in Nevada, another individual the Commissioner of Education in Rhode Island, and one of our individuals was recruited back to the governor's office. I mean, I think it demonstrates how well the opportunity that being at the New York State Education Department presents. It is an opportunity like none other to both be involved in policy conversations with the board and thinking about the direction that we need to be going as a state, but then how do you, again, you're in the middle, how do you take those visions and move them forward? So I have all the confidence that we're going to be bringing in a team of excellent individuals who are going to take the work that is before us and move it forward, and importantly, is going to be able to support you and your colleagues in the field as we think through some of the implementation strategies.
Thanks. I want to compliment you. That was also an excellent recruiting pitch to the audience about state ed being the place to be. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to go back to that roles. Go ahead, please.
Let me just add, it's not just a recruiting pitch. I will tell you that in looking at some of the people that are applying, that I've been very, very proud of the work that the team has done in terms of advancing this issue, because some of the people that are applying for these positions are top notch. So apply. Thank you.
Great to hear. So I want to shift back to the vision relative to roles, responsibilities, the board, the department. Mm-hmm. Last year during 338 testing, we received a memo from you, Chancellor, and the Commissioner about opt-outs and about the notion that kids should be given the right opportunity, et cetera. And it was certainly interpreted by some in the fields as permission for kids to opt out, which we had really worked hard to work through with families and is a big issue in many of our communities. So that is not a critique or criticism, it's an observation that has come up, and would like to give you the opportunity to speak to that and help us understand what's the thought around that. And then in the bigger picture, the role of the Board of Regents versus the Commissioner, that was a new place for us as well. So if we could maybe talk through that a little bit.
So let me address the first part, because we had been having conversations around this issue of what New York state law states. And we were having those conversations in open space during our Board of Regents meeting several times. And some of those conversations were taking place, obviously, during our Regents meeting and the ESSA, and how to work with districts so that it was not a punitive type of a situation. honoring and respecting the fact that what the law says, right? And we were very much committed to that issue throughout the process. So there was really no shift other than, I think, we then began to get different situations that were coming through from different places in terms of students, and some of them were in New York City, and some of them were outside of New York City, where individuals were being told, whether it was parents or being told that they could not opt out for various reasons. I think we had initially a few, and we said, okay, those are, when you get a situation like that, it's random, right? It happens in a system as large as ours, you almost have to expect that. I think we ended up with more and more of these situations coming through. As they started to come through, I recall having the conversation with the commissioner and saying, I think we need to put something out. And we had a pretty extensive conversation around this. It wasn't, and I said, we really need to make sure that the field understands this is the law. We must, and if you recall, the statement was very clear in saying we must, exactly what you do, we must honor the request. There's nothing more than we must honor the request when it's made. And I was very surprised to then receive what I did. And I know Chuck and I talked about this as well, even I think the day before. And I said, but we're just restating what is in law of the requirement. Why the reaction? And I think the reaction was that, later on, of course, I found out the reaction was because in your world, from where you're sitting, as a former superintendent, right? You've got the community and your practice, and you're seeing it up close. You were seeing it as a mixed message. On the one hand, make sure that you reduce this, right? And on the other hand, you're getting this reminder, sort of saying, but this is the law and this is what the expectation. So that's, to be fair, I think that we, and I'm going to take full responsibility for it, we clearly, after you had, your ship had sailed, we then sent a message to you to say, please honor what's in law, when in fact you had already set up a slightly different destination or a different way of handling this. So I think that was definitely, that was an internal, and by that I mean Commissioner, Chancellor, Board of Regents, right? In your mind, sending out two different messages. So that is an area that I will say we have to do a better job, no question about it. But my intent was to make sure that given the many, and there were many, I will tell you, it's not 2 or 3 or 4 after a while, I did say, Commissioner, we have to send something out. I mean, this is, somehow we're getting all this pushback. And so I then said, Commissioner, we have to send something out. Now, the commissioner at that point, in all fairness to her, did push back and said, but the field is already doing that. And I said, no, I really think on this one, we have to send something out. So that's exactly what happened. And I think it's something that we have to be a little bit more sensitive to when you do have a commissioner and you do have a chancellor and the message gets pushed out into the field that may not be as, the coherence may not be there. It's something that clearly we have to work on. And it's something that I know, I recognize from the letter I did receive, that you were letting us know that, make up your mind before you send something out to us. Because we started in one place, and now you're sending something to us as if, wait a second, what's going on? So I do acknowledge that upfront as something that we need to work on.
Great, thank you. So, since we're in my living room with all these people, I want to tell you a story which is just going to make these people very nervous. I remember an elementary principal, brand new elementary principal, and a group of teachers in the building were frustrated towards the end of the year. They had always gotten what they wanted before, and in the interest of equity, we're doing things a little bit differently. And they came to me at the end of the year and said, you know, what do you think your role is as our principal? And as I started to answer, the very experienced teacher at the other end of the table defined for me exactly what my role was as the principal in the building. And it essentially boiled down to, you know, we think you're here to support the things that we'd like to do. And my response was, actually, that's not my role. My role is to make sure that on behalf of the board and the superintendent that kids are getting a meaningful, fun, learning, exciting, engaging experience each and every day that is aligned with the priorities of the community. And if that's supporting your programs, great. If not, I have a responsibility to help create that vision. A lot of us have gone through activities with our boards before in the oversight versus overstep and worked on our roles and how that works best. And one of the activities actually is around reviewing applications. It was interesting when you mentioned that. So again, not a critique, a curiosity. Wondering if one or both of you would like to just explain to us what you look for relative to the role of the Board of Regents. If you're telling somebody from another state, this is what the Board of Regents does, this is what the commissioner ought to be doing on a day-to-day basis.
Before we start, I want Beverly's voice in this. One of the things that
for feisty.
yes, feisty from the North Country. One of the things I want to say is, and you need to know this, we have taken on this past, actually last year, the ways of work, and this was one of Beth's creation with the board, that we wanted to address this issue of the ways of work, the way the board works, and the commissioner. And we have been working on the issue of commissioners' roles and responsibility, as you do with your board, the board's roles and responsibility. I think what happens sometimes is that, and probably with this particular board, the biggest challenge is that there are several of us that have been superintendents. So there are times that you kind of flip, you know, you forget, you are now a board member. You're not the superintendent. And I know I am so guilty of that at times that, you know, I remember a couple of times saying to my colleagues, wait a minute, we're still, once a you know, it's like a principal, but a superintendent, once a superintendent, always a superintendent. I mean, I have it even in my house where my husband will say, excuse me, this is not your district. So I know that feeling of kind of like, wait, what do you mean? You're not doing the dishes right now? I mean, like, look, it's, you know. But part of that is that it's very hard, even after all these years, to let go of being a superintendent. And I will tell you, we have several superintendents on this board that, you know, Beth knows there was an incident, and I even had to say to that superintendent, you cannot go in there into that school. You're going in as a Board of Regents member and not as a superintendent. And that person's response was, you know what, you're right. I am no longer a superintendent. So those are our checkpoints that we have to really constantly look at in terms of our ways of work. But I want to turn it over to Beth.
Can I add a little humor?
Yes.
For a short time, I was a board member in a district where I had been the superintendent. And I kind of knew the characteristic role of the superintendent, so when it would come time to vote on something, somebody had to nudge me, because I never got the chance to vote before. I did the dirty work and the legwork and presented to them and tried to sell them on the idea before we got to the board to vote on things. And everybody burst out laughing because I just wasn't used to that part of the role. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you're sitting, I couldn't maintain that position once I got on the Board of Regents. So I've been in a lot of situations where I've had to take a look at which lens I was supposed to be looking through and how I was supposed to be behaving as a result of that. But I'd like to, if I could, Kevin, and cut me off if you need to, one of the things that I want to bring this back to kids because that's what this is all about, no matter how you slice it. And I've been having a lot of conversations as we've hit this stage in the past few months, and people have asked me questions, and I've asked them questions. And something struck me when we first sat down up here. I've been very sick this past year, and I haven't been able to continue the visits to districts the way I was doing them. And that's where I get my energy, is getting back out there with kids and teachers and where the real work takes place. And I want to go back and talk about, because one of you walked up to me in the last couple of days and said, I'm used to seeing you with Commissioner Elia visiting our districts. It seems strange today not to see the two of you together. And I said, well, that's where we're at, and we need to move forward. And then we prepared to do the bells part for the opening of school. And I was looking at that, and I saw Beth out there bending over with little children. Now, at SED, we don't see her with children. You looked so great, I gotta tell you, because you were, I don't need to go into great detail, but I thought it is so refreshing to see you doing the role from that perspective. And I know you're a mom and fairly young children. And then while I was sick, a student that had graduated from Morristown the first time I was there, because I spent 2 stints there, total of 10 years, sent an email to one of my sons while I was in the hospital. And she said, I don't know if you and your family have had a chance to see this. 3 days before I drove myself to the hospital, I had been in school districts in the northeast corner of my territory. And I saw the superintendent earlier. He used to be at Morristown too, and he was taking me around his district. And we stopped by and his buildings are old. And they have this lovely, lovely library. But it's very old, and I thought, oh, please, that's a treasure. Don't let that disappear. And preschoolers came into the library, and part of the library storage room they've turned into makerspace. So the kids love going there. So this little preschooler comes over to me, and she's got a weaving frame. Some of you may remember those that were part of our growing up. And she's sitting at the table looking up at me, and she's explaining to me what she's doing. The photographer that was following me that day captured the look on that little girl's face, that, aha, I just learned to do this. The kind of thing we recreate over and over again in science labs with drones when I was in another district. Oh, so many wonderful things. And as I was going through my neurological experience and everything, I just kept looking at that picture, because that's what drives us. That's what gets us to get up every day and face the challenges, is helping kids have that look on their face. So when people are asking me, what am I looking for in a new commissioner? I want somebody. Mary Ellen used to get down on her knee, one knee, right down, no matter how low the table was, and she would just one-on-one interact with the kids. That to me was impressive. And I didn't see her do it once. I saw her do it repeatedly, and appropriately for whatever age the kids were. So how do we see those things in a person that's interviewing? And then somebody just sent us an article about, do you really want to look for experience and just experience, or do you want to think out of the box and look for somebody that's brave enough, young enough perhaps, brave enough to say, I got this great new idea. I'd like you to walk with me on this idea and do something new with kids and for kids. So that element to me is incredibly important. The tough part is, how do you recreate that setting in the typical interview? You know, and we typically look for all that experience, but I just don't want us not to think about where the kids fit in on all of this, because to me that's incredibly important. It may be a long walk from that classroom to SED, but they better.
I think we'd suggest a model lesson, perhaps, with a group of children.
Right.
A few other quick topics, because we're running low on time, and I'll give you a preview to the last question that we'd like to ask you. We've talked a lot at our conference about kinship, connections, and supporting each other and supporting the work happening throughout the state. And we would say we've enjoyed great kinship, cooperation, and connection to the State Ed Department, to Commissioner Ilya, and to the work, and we'd like to maintain that. So the last question I'll ask you in a minute will be, from each of your perspectives, how can we help? How can we be supportive? Tell us more, help us understand what we can do as superintendents to be supportive right now in this interim period, but also long term. What is our role? How do you envision that connection? Before that, quick comments, if you could, about teacher substitute shortage. What are things the department might be thinking about, the board might be thinking about in supporting that big challenge for us? And you mentioned it in your opening. And the other is around pathways, diploma requirements, alternative pathways, and kind of that bigger picture for. You clearly expressed that it is important, but what do you see that looking like, and when can we expect to see those things happening?
Let me start with the teacher shortage issue. I think we've been grappling now for almost 2 years. If you recall, we had a situation with the 90 days, and then that sunset. One of the real tensions around this issue was that as we were going through requirements for teacher certification, we kept adding additional teacher certification requirements. And so on the one hand, we were expanding on teacher certification requirements, and then on the other hand, we had situations where we had teacher substitutes that had a high school diploma. So we were looking at this and saying, how is it possible that we're talking about a highly qualified teacher, a highly qualified environment, but we would accept the issue of having, and now obviously in some places it's not, we don't do that, but in other places that was the practice. So we had these practices in place from way back that allowed, for various reasons, and I know Regent Odekirk has shared some of those in some of the, particularly the rural places, how challenging it is to get substitutes. But at the same time, it was that dissonance, that tension of constantly talking about the requirements of a highly qualified teacher, at the same time having 90 days, which is half a year, with a sub that in some cases would just have a high school diploma. So that was, that tension on the board was very, very challenging and difficult. And again, we're still grappling with what are the ways that we can work with you as superintendents in communities to deal with, as you heard me say in my speech, the uniqueness, but at the same time honor the ultimate issue that we really want for all children. So I think that tension needs to be kind of worked through. It's not so, if you will, in some places, because, for example, there are some communities that would not accept those conditions at all. But and even in some of those communities, they are now experiencing the shortage issue, because I think this is spreading. So it's something that we welcome the opportunity to think with you and to possibly enjoy the experience that you all have had in the past of having input, impact, and your voices as part of that conversation. The second question is very similar. I've had, as a matter of fact, coming up here and also even approaching the conference, talking to Sherry and other people about the ideas that they have. Bill Johnson, I know, has been working with his, some of his colleagues out on Long Island and other places. Westchester is also doing the same. Cheryl Champ mentioned some of the work that they're doing to look at this high school graduation issue, because this is one that I think we're struggling with. But we want to do it together. This is not one that we want to do this alone. I think there's a lot of misinformation. You know, originally when I think I wrote the onboard article, and I did say it in the onboard article, this is going to be very difficult, very challenging. This is the golden standard for some people, not for everybody. I think as a matter of fact, Tim Kramer said, I never did Regents exam and I survived. So, you know, we have people who are, you know, it's like the Wheaties. If you don't give me my high school, you know, Regents exams, you can't be successful. And there are others that say, well, listen, I came from other places that never had Regents exams and I made it through. I think for New York State is honoring what exists. How do we move to possibly looking at a composite? How do we get all our best thinking into this conversation? So part of what I think we're doing, and Beth is working, I think, with the DSs, looking at it locally and doing it bottom up. Let's look at this issue locally and move the local conversation to a place that creates an opportunity for a commission so that people feel their voices and their best thinking is part of the process. So that's the direction we're going. I think originally I had talked to the commissioner and the board and we were very ambitious, but we realized, you know, I almost had heart failure when I heard a year. I said, this is not the kind of situation that you do in a year. If you're going to be really, truly thoughtful, let's take our time and let's really create the conditions to allow for that work to take place. I do want to say, because I also know it's another rumor, I want to honor the fact that great work was done to elevate the DSs. Great work was done, and we want to continue that. That's a gold mine, and that's an opportunity to continue what has been started in terms of elevating individuals that are extremely talented. And I know Beth is having conversations with the DSs and involving them in this work, particularly around the whole high school graduation piece. So I think that's one of the things we want to do. But you know, again, we want to do this work with you. We want to think with you, and with you, that's a generic. It means you, School Boards Association, you know, NYSED, UFT, CSA, SANY, you know, Advocates for Children, all the thought partners that are out there that contribute their lens to looking at this issue, because there is not one lens. As my grandmother would say, remember those of us that used to have the kaleidoscope, right? What was the beauty of the kaleidoscope when you looked and you adjusted it? I would see the purples. They were like my absolute favorite. And my brother would look at the blues and they were his favorite. And I think that New York State is a kaleidoscope. Let's look through the various lenses and let's create opportunities to have our children look through them and see their own kaleidoscopes.
So important to clarify for my 2 high school age kids, 2 of my 3, there will be Regents exams next year. I want to just be really clear on that. Okay.
For 2 of your 3, yes.
So the bigger picture, and I want to go back to what I had said before about how can we help. There's, you know, you had mentioned thinking with us, getting input from us, thinking through that. I would just say that our Commissioners Advisory Council, our House of Delegates, and a variety of groups, you mentioned the DSs, I would agree with you on behalf of my colleagues, a gold mine of people that can give you that feedback. And we have for a long time been able to provide a lot of feedback and that input to the Commissioner and with our acting Commissioner. So we look forward to continuing that, and that's a place you could go to for a lot of that. Of course, Niskis and our staff members, whether it's Bob Lowry, Greg Burke, Chuck Dietrich, Jazz, have been very helpful in providing you that feedback also. We are more than happy to continue that relationship and look forward to that. So in the short term and then the long term, maybe 10, 15 seconds for each of you as we wrap up before all the doors start to open. What is the picture for you, the best ways we can help you now and in the long term? How can we be your partners?
So short term, open communication, transparency, and honesty. We've got a lot going on at the department. You are the educational leaders. I am forever thankful for the partnership that has already come forward. And whether it's Chuck, Bob, DS, folks have made themselves available to think through some of the day-to-day challenges that are already in front of us. I think the more we can understand your perspective as we're navigating some very difficult situations, the better position will be to make a well thought out decision. So open communication, honesty, and transparency. It doesn't matter if I like what you're saying or not.
Thank you.
I would say ditto to what Beth just said, and I've had the luxury of working with a JMT that really includes me, and I listen carefully, and there are patterns that develop through all of that. Being involved with each other and honest, open, and tell us with candor, and I get plenty of candor along the way, and I think all of that's important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chancellor.
I think for this year, one of the things that I know in the last 4 years, I have been spending a little bit more time. I did have an opportunity to visit Bev in her own district. And by the way, I was greeted, I mean, I have to tell you.
You're not going to tell this.
Oh, I am going to tell. I have to tell you, this was like my best place in terms of being greeted the way I was greeted. Flashing lights, I mean, amazing, amazing, amazing. Only it was the state troopers.
And she was late, and I was wondering
running,
where she
right,
was.
I was running late, and because it's a border town, they wanted to know, what are you doing in this area? You know, so I said to Beverly and her audience, I said, I have never had so many flashing lights, even in being in the Bronx, right? So I am looking forward to not just the work, the getting to know more about who you are in terms of districts, but I'm also looking forward to having even a deeper understanding of the various communities that make up the state and the various challenges, as well as the different world-class contributions and things that people are doing. You know, I remember recently, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, going to Middletown and being in the most amazing situation that I had seen for a while and saying, my God, this is like unbelievable. And I took that back with me. So I think the opportunity to get to see more places in terms of New York State is something that I'm looking forward to. And also hearing some of the perspective from people that sometimes I don't hear from. I mean, there are strong voices in this room that are, like a good conductor hears that trombone and certain voices, but there are some amazing voices that we don't get to hear from. So I'm hopeful that this year will give me the opportunity to hear those voices, to take that back. And so by the time we get a new commission in place, that will inform also the work that I continue to do in the role as Chancellor and with my colleagues on the board.
Open invitation to Brighton. We'd love to have you, and I know many of my colleagues would agree. Please don't get up right away, but please join me in thanking our guests for being with us today. A round of applause, please. Greatly appreciate it. If you could just stay for 1 second. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just such a pleasure to have you here, and for your candor and transparency in this conversation, much, much appreciated.